What's up, developers? This is part 2 of the D3 React and TypeScript tutorial, and we are going to be learning about data joins. Data joins are a way we can tie data and make a relationship with the data and its selection so that we can use the data to implement and modify our SVGs. Before we begin, I'm going to start fresh, and I'll be starting fresh for each video just so you can get accustomed on how to build a D3 and React project. First off, we have an SVG rendered, and we are going to build a ref. And we'll assign that ref to the SVG. And let's go ahead and import select from D3 selection. And we are actually going to save this selection into state. So let's go ahead and bring a useState. Go ahead and also bring in a use effect. And in the dependency array, let's go ahead and add selection. Okay, and in the use effect, we're going to write a conditional. If the selection has not been set yet, then set the selection. And we're going to set that with the D3 selection. Now, in order to satisfy the type, you're going to have to hover over the selection, and you're going to have to copy this complex type. And the type of the selection will be either null or this type that we just copied. And let's go ahead and import this from selection. And now we have that type satisfied. Okay. Now in the else statement, since we do know we have a selection, we can do whatever we want with it. So let's go ahead and append a rectangle and give it some attributes. Let's give it a 200 width and a fill color of, say, purple. Okay, and there you have it. We have a rectangle. Cool. Now I do want to introduce a selection method called data, and that is how we will tie our data together. It accepts an array or a function that returns an array, but we're not worried about a function yet. So let's go ahead and create some mock data, right? And in that mock data, we're just gonna go ahead and add some attributes with 200, height 150, color, let's say orange. Okay, and how do we access this data? Well, we pass it in first, and I want to console log this selection first. Okay, and in the selection, if we go ahead and if we go ahead and look at the DOM element and scroll all the way down, you can see that we have successfully joined the data with the selection. So we have access to the data. Okay, so how do we access it in the code? Well, whenever you're writing an attribute, you can either hard code in a value for the attribute, like so, or you can pass in a function, and in that function, that is where we have the access to the data. So D dot, so you can see if we have Typescript, they give us auto completion. And so we want the width. Let's go ahead and use the height. And let's go ahead and add the fill color. Make sure you also append the rect. You don't want to add attributes to nothing. And there you have it. We have successfully created an SVG using data. Okay. Now let's say we have in our SVG container, let's say we have multiple rectangles already rendered, right? So how do we utilize the data to modify these rectangles, right? And one thing to note is that each selection D3 selections have a method, also have the select and select all methods. So we can grab the selection and we can select all rectangles, and there we can have a selection with these rectangles. Okay, so let's modify our data, and we'll say units, and we'll say, let's say 150, color purple, and let's go ahead and copy this twice. $150. Let's go ahead and make this red and make this blue. Okay, and let's go ahead and pass in that data. Data. Okay, and let's go ahead and write the attributes since we have access to the data. I'm sorry, we don't have width. We're just going to hard code 100, but we do have height. And that is units. Fill. And we want to space it out. They're going to be stacked on top. They're going to be stacked on top of each other, so we need to space them out. And we know this by the last video. Okay. We're not worried about the element, so di underscore I times 100, and we have successfully spaced them out. Okay, so all right, cool. So we're looking more and more like a bar chart, but we're still quite a bit away. But we have successfully learned how to join the data, and now the question arises: what if we have lots of data but no actual rectangles rendered? How does D3 know how to append more rectangles if there is more data than there are actual rectangles rendered? Right, and that is where the enter selection comes in. So let's go ahead and add more data. We'll say this is 70, and we'll make this 120. Let's go ahead and make teal. What other color I haven't used? Orange. Orange sounds good. And let's go ahead and save this as a constant. Capture this selection as a constant, and let's go ahead and console log what that is. Okay, so we have a selection, and we also have an enter selection, and in the enter selection we have an array where the first three elements are empty, and that is because we already have that rendered into the DOM. However, we still have these two virtual elements corresponding to the data that has yet to be entered to the DOM, and we can have access to that by the enter selection. So if I have that rex, if I have the selection, I can have access to those two elements that have not yet entered the DOM by utilizing the enter selection. Okay, so let's go ahead and append rect for each of those two, and let's go ahead and copy down the attributes. And one thing to note, the default size of the SVG is 300. Our default width is 300. We're not going to have enough room, so let's make it 500. Okay, and cool. And there you have it. It's looking more and more like a bar chart, but we're still not quite there yet, right? That's data joins, and that is the enter selection. Next up, we're going to talk about scales. All right, I'll see you there.